Hey everyone, this is Ryan Ecker with Peak Endurance Solutions, and you're listening to the VO2 Max podcast. What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the VO2 Max podcast. If this is your first time tuning into this podcast, and I hope you enjoy today's episode, and I hope you continue to tune into future episodes or go back through our library and listen to previous episodes as well. I wanted to do this particular topic after the last podcast I published, which was talking all about the very few supplements that do have research to back up their potential benefit for endurance performance. So this podcast is going to be all about omega-3 fatty acid and its supplementation and the effects that it has on endurance performance, or the lack thereof. We're going to get into that research throughout the podcast. But I wanted to touch on omega-3 fatty acids in particular because it's such a common supplement for anyone to be taking, but especially athletes to be taking. It's actually one of the most common supplements that an athlete might take outside of something else, like, say, a multivitamin. Just because the consumption of omega-3 fatty acids in especially the typical Western diet is pretty low. And so sometimes a lot of athletes, or just people in general, you don't necessarily have to be an athlete, will turn to an omega-3 fatty acid supplement because of the extensive research to back up the health benefits of consuming omega-3 fatty acids. So that's why I wanted to do this particular episode, was because there's not really a ton of research looking into the potential benefits of omega-3 fatty acids, specifically on endurance performance. But there is a little bit of research, and I wanted to touch on it because of the popularity of taking omega-3 fatty acids in general, just so that you're aware of the potential benefits that supplement might be having on endurance performance. So omega-3 fatty acids are probably most commonly known for their anti-inflammatory benefits. And omega-3 fatty acids have a pretty profound impact on various systems in the human body, but one of their functions is as an anti-inflammatory or an inflammation modulator. And so with that being said, a lot of athletes will sometimes opt for approaches or supplements that reduce inflammation in the hopes that it'll help their endurance performance or just their sport performance in general, because it'll help them cope with a lot of the inflammation that comes from heavy training. Now, I'm not going to dive too deep into like the role that inflammation plays in recovery. I've done that in previous podcast episodes, and I've also done that in some of the writing that I publish on my website as well. So I'm not going to get too deep into the mechanisms behind recovery and whether or not inflammation is a good thing or a bad thing for recovery. I will say that inflammation is a necessary part of the recovery process. So when you do intense training and you stimulate the production of pro-inflammatory cytokines, it is a necessary evil, so to speak, in the recovery or adaptation process. Because really, recovery is just referring to adaptation, right? Like, those two terms are somewhat interchangeable in the sense that when you recover, you're adapting. And so you can't really adapt without recovery. And part of that adaptation process, some of the molecular signaling mechanisms that are needed for you to properly adapt to training require inflammation. So I will say, just to start, that sometimes just totally reducing or eliminating inflammation isn't necessarily a good thing in terms of recovering properly and adapting to intense training in the long run. But that is generally one of the premises that people have when they try and reduce their inflammation, is that they hope that it's going to help them recover between training sessions, which again is not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. Just know that inflammation is needed to recover properly. But there are other potential benefits to omega-3 fatty acids for endurance performance that don't necessarily rely on just the inflammation theory. So I'm going to touch on that and what some of the research says about that. But first off, we should probably discuss what omega-3 fatty acids are and what the differences are between omega-3 fatty acids and omega-6 fatty acids, which are the two main types of polyunsaturated fatty acids that we consume in our diet. So most people have an overconsumption of omega-6 fatty acids in the diet, especially in typical Western diets that are heavy in things like vegetable oils and olive oils and things like that, and are less heavy in fatty fishes or fish oils. So there's nothing wrong with omega-6 fatty acids, obviously. It's usually just when that ratio in the body of omega-3 to omega-6 fatty acids, when that ratio gets thrown way off and there's way too much omega-6 fatty acids, sometimes there can be the potential for detrimental health benefits. So that's why normally the consumption of both omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids is important and essential. Also because the body doesn't necessarily produce those fatty acids on its own. You typically need to consume those fatty acids. And so normally most people get plenty of omega-6 fatty acids in their diet. It's not usually too much of a concern, but usually it's the omega-3 fatty acids that people don't consume enough of. And it's because they're primarily found in fish. They are found in some other things like walnuts and some other nuts. You can get small quantities of omega-3 fatty acids, but like the best sources of omega-3s comes from fish and fish oils. And most people don't consume enough fish to be getting enough omega-3 fatty acids in their diet. So now omega-3 fatty acids are comprised of a few different acids or polyunsaturated fatty acids. So there's EPAs, DHAs, and then ALAs. I'm not even going to go into what those acronyms stand for, at least in this podcast, because the names themselves, you're never going to remember it. Just know that omega-3 fatty acids consist of EPA, DHA, and ALA. So for the most part, when you go get a fish oil supplement, it's going to have EPA and DHA. And that's because the body can't produce EPA and DHA on its own very effectively. It can produce EPA and DHA through the conversion of ALA, which is another omega-3 fatty acid, but it's super, super inefficient. So some research that I've looked at has suggested that if you consume, say, ALA in your diet, which is typically a little bit more common than EPA and DHA, and I'm pretty sure that walnuts, for example, are the main source of omega-3 fatty acid that you're getting from walnuts is ALA, which is good because the body can convert some of that to EPA and DHA, which is typically the usable form of omega-3 fatty acids in the body, but it's super inefficient. And some research that I've read suggests that it's as low as like 3 to 10%. So again, if you're consuming some omega-3 fatty acids in the form of ALA in your diet, let's say you eat some walnuts on a weekly basis, then that's good. You're obviously getting some omega-3 fatty acids, but you might not be getting enough of the converted form of EPA and DHA that your body needs because that conversion rate is so poor and inefficient in the human body. So typically, most people are under-consuming EPA and DHA in particular. And those are the forms of omega-3 fatty acids that your body needs for there to be an optimal ratio of omega-3s to omega-6s. So really the best way to get that is just through eating fish on a regular basis. But like myself, personally, I don't necessarily enjoy eating fish very often, if at all. So I typically rely on a fish oil supplement, a high-quality fish oil supplement to get in my omega-3 fatty acids, but more specifically the EPAs and DHAs. All right. So that's the difference between omega-3s and omega-6s. And really when it comes to omega-3s, it's the EPA and the DHA that you want to look for in a supplement if you're going the supplement route, as that's usually the types of omega-3 fatty acids that people aren't consuming enough of. All right. And so there's a ton of research to show that omega-3 fatty acid consumption, whether it's through fish or through a supplement form, most research focuses on a supplementation form of omega-3 fatty acids for the simplicity of research purposes. But there's tons of research over the decades to show that consumption of omega-3 fatty acids has profound health benefits, but especially when it comes to cardiovascular related health, so like reducing the risk of cardiovascular related events, so things like strokes and heart attacks, but then also just improving markers of cardiovascular health like blood pressure and cholesterol numbers, things of that nature. So the generalized health benefits of omega-3 fatty acids are pretty profound, and there's a lot of research to back it up. Now, there are a few potential mechanisms by which omega-3 fatty acids could have an impact on endurance performance. The research on that is much more sparse. And I'm going to touch on that research because I found a really good review article that's pretty recent that touches on and tries to summarize the research surrounding the use of omega-3 fatty acid supplementation for endurance performance. All right, and I'll link that paper in the show notes, so if you want to go in and read that paper yourself, you can read it. It's a pretty good paper, and it's from 2019, I believe, so pretty recent, and so it does a good job at capturing all the research that's been done to date in regards to omega-3 fatty acids and endurance performance. So one of the potential ways in which omega-3 fatty acid supplementation or consumption is thought to improve endurance performance is because of some of the effects that have been seen in research of omega-3 fatty acids being able to stimulate or enhance mitochondrial biogenesis, or basically the formation of more mitochondria. Now, obviously, as any athlete, any type of athlete, but in particular endurance athletes, we rely very heavily on energy conversion via mitochondria. So the mitochondria is where aerobic and oxidative metabolism takes place, which obviously plays a huge role in the ability to produce the energy needed to perform your best at an endurance endeavor, right? So obviously the more mitochondria we have, the better. And that's actually one of the primary adaptations to endurance exercise is the formation of more mitochondria. So if we can do something else to enhance mitochondrial biogenesis, then that would obviously have some type of positive impact on endurance performance. Now, the research that's noticed that omega-3 fatty acid supplementation can enhance mitochondrial biogenesis hasn't been done in athletes, which is unfortunate because, of course, we would want to see that mitochondrial biogenesis would happen in athletes, and then there would be some type of improvement in objective endurance performance. Unfortunately, that research has been done in rodents and obese individuals. So it's not necessarily enough research to conclude that, yes, for sure, omega-3 fatty acid supplementation is going to enhance mitochondrial formation in endurance athletes, and that's then going to have an effect on endurance performance. It's enough research to kind of pique curiosity and say, well, I wonder if this could have an effect on endurance athletes as well. But unfortunately, the review found that really that research just takes place in rodents and obese individuals. So the ability to translate that over to endurance athletes is lacking at this point. But the fact that there is that potential for omega-3 fatty acids to enhance the formation of more mitochondria in endurance athletes is still there. It's still a theory worth exploring. And so just because we don't have that research at this point doesn't mean that it is impossible for omega-3s to have that effect in endurance athletes. We just don't necessarily have the research at this point to back it up. But that is one potential mechanism underlying the potential benefits of omega-3 fatty acids for endurance performance. Another one where there's a little bit more evidence, and there's some evidence in endurance athletes, another mechanism is the potential effects that omega-3 fatty acids can have on exercise efficiency, or the oxygen cost that's required to perform a given submaximal endurance effort. And so there is a little bit of evidence to show that omega-3 fatty acids have a potential effect on stroke volume of the heart and muscle cell insulin sensitivity. And there's a little bit of research in cyclists demonstrating this. However, in this research, there wasn't an actual translation of that benefit into objective cycling performance in the form of a time trial. But in this particular study in cyclists, they did notice that there was a reduced oxygen cost at given submaximal exercise intensities. So again, in this particular case, there is some research and evidence in endurance athletes and cyclists in particular in this case, which is good. And it shows that there was some type of physiological effect of omega-3 fatty acid supplementation, but there wasn't an objective real-world performance enhancement. So at least in terms of this potential mechanism of omega-3 fatty acids, the research is more specific to endurance athletes. That's good. And there was a physiological benefit that was derived from it, or a physiological change, but there wasn't any real-world performance benefit. So still, we can't necessarily conclude that for sure omega-3 fatty acid supplementation has an effect on endurance performance. But again, there is still the potential for this to have a benefit for endurance performance, because obviously, especially with long distance endurance endeavors, the name of the game is really efficiency and not slowing down. So if you think of something like a marathon or like an Ironman or an ultra endurance marathon, it's usually not the fastest people that win. It's the people that can hold the highest average pace or the faster effort without slowing down. And so efficiency is the name of the game. And so if you can consume less oxygen at a given submaximal endurance pace, then your efficiency is higher. And so if you can be more efficient at a given exercise intensity, then that can potentially bode well for prolonged endurance events. So again, it's still just a theory, but there is that potential benefit of omega-3 fatty acids on endurance performance. We just don't have the research to show any objective performances that have improved because of omega-3 fatty acid supplementation. And so that's the second primary mechanism through which omega-3 fatty acids could potentially influence endurance performance. Now, a third way that omega-3 fatty acid supplementation could improve endurance performance is through the generalized effects that omega-3 fatty acids have on health in general. So omega-3 fatty acids have, as well as profound effects on the cardiovascular system, they also have pretty profound effects on the immune system. And there's some evidence to show that omega-3 fatty acids can reduce the risk of upper respiratory tract infection amongst endurance athletes. Which is obviously good, because if you're sick less often, then you're training harder and consistently more often, and therefore you're likely to have better adaptation and greater effects from your training in the long run. Because if you're sick all the time, obviously your training is more fragmented and more sporadic, and you're obviously not going to be you're not going to get the benefits from training as much as if you were training more consistently and less fragmented. So obviously, if omega-3 fatty acids can improve your health and reduce the incidence of illness or the likelihood of illness, then that's going to bode well on your training, and then that's going to eventually bode well on your performance and the adaptations that you experience from that training. So that's the third mechanism, and it's more of like an indirect mechanism in the sense that, like, if you're healthier, you don't perform better right away. But if you're healthier, you have the opportunity to train more and to train more consistently, which in the long run will potentially help your performance. And so besides the fact that omega-3 fatty acids could reduce your risk of upper respiratory tract infection, if you don't consume enough omega-3 fatty acids and then you start to consume omega-3 fatty acids, and let's just say you improve your generalized health because of that, that can only have a potential positive impact on your performance if you're healthier, right? So obviously, if you consume omega-3 fatty acids on a regular basis and you have enough omega-3 fatty acids in your system, consuming more of them doesn't necessarily confer any additional benefit. And there's some research to show that there is like a dose response effect. So you have benefits up to a certain point, just like with anything. And usually it's if you don't consume enough of it, starting to consume it is where you notice the largest beneficial effect. And so when it comes to health, if you're not consuming any, and then you start to consume omega-3 fatty acids, that's where the potential health benefits come from, not necessarily from overloading on omega-3 fatty acids if you're already consuming enough omega-3 fatty acids. But that potential indirect effect of improved health on performance in the long run is still a potential reality for endurance athletes as well. And so that is one of the other ways in which omega-3 fatty acids are thought to improve endurance performance. Now, there haven't been any studies done, just because this research is so sparse. There hasn't been any studies that have been done that look at, well, if we start to supplement endurance athletes with omega-3 fatty acids, are they sick less? And then are those who are taking the omega-3 fatty acids and who are getting sick less often also then performing better and training more consistently? That research hasn't been done. So again, it's still just speculation at this point, and it's still just a theory. But that research just hasn't been done. So it's not necessarily that that benefit doesn't exist. It's just that that research hasn't been done. All right. So those are the three potential, or the primary ways in which omega-3 fatty acids are thought to enhance endurance performance. So just to recap, Omega-3 fatty acids could potentially enhance formation of new mitochondria, which would obviously have a potential benefit for endurance athletes. It can reduce the oxygen cost of submaximal endurance exercise, which again could have a potential benefit on endurance performance. And then it has potential health benefits, particularly immune modulating health benefits that could potentially in the long run improve the health of the athlete, reduce the risk of infection, and keep that athlete training more consistently in the long run, which could indirectly have an effect on endurance performance overall. And again, the research is just so sparse and there's so few studies looking at this that we can't definitively conclude that there's enough evidence to show that omega-3 fatty acids improves endurance performance. But there are the potential theories that are out there, and there's just not enough research to show whether or not those theories hold true. So basically my conclusion from this personally that I draw is, and I particularly became interested in omega-3 fatty acids about 6 to 12 months ago because I was working to improve my diet, and one of the most obvious and glaring things that I could improve in my diet was the incorporation of more omega-3 fatty acids, simply because I didn't consume any fish and I didn't really consume any nuts or any other foods that were high in omega-3 fatty acids. So I started to take a high-quality omega-3 fatty acid supplement, just in the hopes that it was going to more generally improve my health in the long run. And that's where I started to become more and more interested in omega-3 fatty acid supplementation. Now, basically my conclusion that I draw from all this research, my own personal opinion and personal conclusion that I draw is, if you don't consume fish on a regular basis that's high in omega-3 fatty acids, it's definitely not going to hurt you to start either consuming fish if you like fish, or to take a good high quality omega-3 fatty acid supplement. There's only potential upside to it. Worst case scenario, you improve your health more broadly, but you don't really notice a massive difference. But because you're consuming those omega-3 fatty acids when you weren't before, your health improves, you reduce your risk of certain chronic diseases in the long run, but you don't really notice anything. And you don't really notice any drastic improvement in your performance. That's worst case scenario. Best case scenario, you improve your health, you reduce your risk of certain chronic diseases that you might be more at risk for if you don't consume omega-3 fatty acids. And then you also might notice a potential benefit on your performance. Again, the research isn't there to back it up that you're likely going to improve your endurance performance, but the potential benefit is there. So my thought process is, if you don't consume omega-3 fatty acids, why not try to start consuming omega-3 fatty acids through fish or supplementation, and then see if there's any potential benefit. But again, worst case, you spend a little bit of money on omega-3 fatty acids and you potentially improve your health. So it's also that's obviously not a bad scenario to be in. And that's my own personal thought process when it comes to this. But again, there's obviously not enough research to show that it enhances endurance performance. So if your primary reason for consuming omega-3 fatty acids is to improve performance, just know that that research isn't necessarily there to back it up. So, but that's my take on it. And that's my take on it considering the limited research that's available on omega-3 fatty acid supplementation. And again, I think this is a good podcast to follow up on my prior podcast where I was talking about the few substances that have enough evidence to improve and to show that they improve endurance performance. And so even though there's not necessarily enough evidence right now to conclude that omega-3 fatty acids can enhance endurance performance, there is the possibility in the future that once we accumulate more evidence, that we can potentially add it to the list amongst things that we do have enough evidence to suggest that they work. Things like caffeine, beta-alanine, nitrates and nitrites, and sodium bicarbonate. Which again, if you want to learn more about those particular substances and the research surrounding their benefit for endurance performance, go ahead and check out my last podcast that was talking about evidence-based supplementation for endurance performance. But that was everything I had on omega-3 fatty acids. So hopefully you are a little bit more informed about the potential benefits of omega-3 fatty acids, not only for your health in general, but the potential benefits or the theorized benefits of omega-3 fatty acids for endurance performance. And again, if you want to read a little bit more about omega-3 fatty acids, because it's actually quite fascinating, the amount of, or the ways in which omega-3s can enhance your health and your performance. And there's a variety of ways in which it can potentially do that. I've included a couple references that I used to create this podcast in the show notes. Some very recent review articles that take a deep dive into some of the potential performance benefits and some of the well-documented health benefits of omega-3 fatty acids. So feel free to read those papers and get a little bit more informed on omega-3 fatty acids. But hopefully you enjoyed this episode, and hopefully you will continue to tune into future podcasts. As always, if you have any questions on this topic or any other topics that I've covered in previous podcasts, feel free to reach me via email at peakenduranceSolutions@outlook.com. You can also go to my website, which I've linked into the show notes, and you can message me through my website. That goes directly into my email inbox as well. So again, hopefully you enjoyed this podcast and you walked away with some new knowledge that you didn't have before, and hopefully you continue listening to future episodes. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. If you liked what you heard in today's episode, please feel free to leave us a review. Those reviews are greatly appreciated and help spread the word about our podcast, as well as help us improve the content that we deliver to our listeners. And then finally, if you know of anyone who would be interested in listening to our podcast, please go ahead and share our podcast with them.